The night before my convocation ceremony, my mother called me at 11:47 p.m. I remember the exact time because I had just finished ironing my academic gown and had set my alarm for 6 in the morning. I was nervous in the way you get nervous before something you've worked 8 years toward. A quiet, almost reverential kind of nervous. I poured myself a glass of water, sat on the edge of my bed, and answered. She didn't say hello. "Your brother doesn't want to come tomorrow," she said, "and honestly, I think if he's not comfortable, we should respect that." I asked her what she meant. "He feels like you've always made him look bad. All the degrees, the job, the—" She paused, and I could hear her choosing words carefully. "He thinks tomorrow is just going to be another thing you use to make the rest of us feel small." I sat there on the edge of that bed for a long moment. My gown was hanging on the back of the closet door. I had a hood with gold trim and a doctoral cap I'd practiced putting on in the bathroom mirror 3 separate times that week. I had spent 8 years in graduate school. I had defended my dissertation in February in front of a committee of 5 people who asked me questions for 2.5 hours, and I had answered every single one of them. And my mother was calling me the night before my convocation to tell me that my brother's feelings about my success were the priority. "Okay," I said. I didn't have another word in me. "I knew you'd understand," she said, and she hung up. I didn't sleep that night. I should tell you something about my brother first, because people always want to know how it starts. How does a family get to the point where one person's achievement becomes a threat? It starts small. It starts so small you almost don't notice until you're 31 years old, sitting on the edge of a bed holding a phone that just went dark. My brother is 4 years older than me. Growing up in our house in Mississauga, he was the one who got the Saturday hockey equipment, the driving lessons, the benefit of every doubt. When he dropped out of his business program at Sheridan after 18 months, my parents sat around the kitchen table and talked about how the program wasn't right for him, how he needed something more practical, how he was a hands-on learner. When I got a full scholarship to McMaster at 17, my mother said very quietly, "Try not to make a big deal of it at dinner." I didn't make a big deal of it. I made a habit of making myself smaller. I called home less. I stopped mentioning my grades. When I got into the doctoral program at the University of Toronto, I told my parents over text. My father texted back a thumbs-up emoji. My brother didn't respond at all. I made peace with it by telling myself it didn't matter. That family was family regardless. That one day they would understand. You tell yourself these things long enough and they start to feel like wisdom instead of what they actually are, which is survival. The man who saved me, and I do not use that word lightly, was my department chair's husband. His name was Arthur. He was 63 years old, retired from a career in civil engineering, and he had attended every single doctoral convocation in that department for 11 years because, as he told me once over coffee in the faculty lounge, "Your supervisors meet your family. That's just how it works." I had met Arthur maybe a dozen times at department events. He was the kind of man who remembered what you'd told him 6 months ago and asked follow-up questions. He remembered that my mother had been having knee problems. He remembered that I'd grown up near the Cooksville GO station. He was a genuinely warm person in a way that had become almost unfamiliar to me. 3 weeks before convocation, I ran into him at a faculty coffee hour and made the mistake, or perhaps the best decision of my life, of answering honestly when he asked how the ceremony preparations were going. I told him what was happening, not all of it, not the full weight of it, but enough. That my family situation was complicated, that I wasn't sure who would be there to walk me across the stage. He looked at me for a moment. Then he said, "Would it be strange if I asked to escort you? Not to replace anyone, just so you don't have to walk in alone." I told him I'd think about it. I thought about it for 3 days and then I said yes. What I didn't tell Arthur was the rest of it. Because here is the thing about my brother that I had spent 8 years pretending I didn't know. He had been using my name. It started when I was 23 and in my first year of graduate school. I found out almost by accident. A call from a collections agency about a credit card I'd never opened. I dealt with it quietly. I told myself it was a mistake, an administrative error, some kind of mix-up. I closed the account and I moved on. But it wasn't a mistake. Over the following years I found 4 more accounts. A store credit card. A personal line of credit with a credit union in Brampton, a cell phone contract, a financing plan for a snowmobile he'd bought in 2019 and never paid a single installment on, every single one in my name, every single one with a mailing address I'd never lived at. I am a researcher. I know how to document things. I spent 2 years building a file so thorough that the fraud investigator at the RCMP later told me it was the most organized victim file she'd ever received. I had the original account applications. I had the forged signatures. I had the credit bureau reports. I had the dates. I had everything. I had been waiting for the right moment, not out of any particular sense of drama, but because I needed to be in a position where I could not be pressured, where I was financially independent enough that my parents' disapproval couldn't touch me, where I had a job offer signed and a life that was entirely my own. That moment arrived approximately 3 months before my convocation ceremony, when I accepted a position as a research director at a federal policy institute in Ottawa with a salary that made my mother's silence over the phone feel almost comedic when I told her. I made the call to the RCMP the following week. They told me the process would take time. I told them I had time. What I did not know, what I could not have planned, was that the investigator would reach out to my brother for an interview the Wednesday before my convocation. I did not know that he would panic. I did not know that he would call my mother in a spiral that she would describe later to relatives as completely out of nowhere. I did not know that my mother, armed with this information, would call me at 11:47 the night before my ceremony. She thought she was protecting him. She thought she was managing me. She had spent 31 years managing me, and it had always worked. The morning of convocation, I woke up at 6 and made coffee and stood at the window of my apartment on Bloor Street watching the city come up in the light. I was not crying. I was past crying. I felt something quieter and stranger than that, a kind of clarity, the way the air feels after a very long rain. Arthur arrived at my apartment at 8:30 with his wife, my supervisor, who had her own gown over her arm and a thermos of strong tea. She hugged me at the door. She didn't ask if I was okay. She just said, "You ready?" And I said yes. Convocation Hall at the University of Toronto is a building that demands something of you. The wood paneling, the vaulted ceiling, the light that comes through the high windows in long, pale columns. I have attended ceremonies there as a guest, as a graduate, and now as someone about to receive the highest degree the university offers. Walking in, I felt the weight of it in my chest. The doctoral candidates were lined up in the corridor before the processional. I found my place in the alphabetical queue. I did not look at the audience seating. I did not look for my parents. But I heard someone say my name, my last name, formally from the direction of the door. And I turned. My parents had come. My mother was in a navy blue blazer. My father was in a gray suit that I recognized from my undergraduate convocation 9 years before. And my brother was with them. He looked, there is only one word for it, trapped. He looked like a man who had received a call from the RCMP 4 days ago and had spent every hour since trying to calculate his options. He was wearing a jacket that was slightly too small across the shoulders, and he would not meet my eyes. My mother walked over to me with her chin slightly up, the way she has always carried herself when she is about to say something she has decided in advance. "We wanted to come," she said. As if the phone call had not happened. As if 11:47 had not happened. "We're family." I looked at her for a moment. I said, "I know." Arthur stepped forward then, quietly, naturally, the way he does everything, and positioned himself at my side. He offered me his arm in a way that was so easy, so unhurried, that it looked like it had been planned for months, because, in a way, it had. My mother looked at him. She looked at me. "Who is this?" she asked. "This is Arthur," I said. "He's been kind enough to escort me today." She blinked. My brother shifted his weight behind her. My father looked at his shoes. Arthur smiled pleasantly at them and said, "Lovely to meet you all. She's worked incredibly hard for today." And then the processional music began and we turned and walked. There are things I will remember for the rest of my life. The sound of my heels on the stone floor of the corridor, the weight of Arthur's arm, steady and unhurried. The moment we came through the doors into the hall and the light from those high windows fell across everything. My parents were seated near the middle section. I did not look at them directly, but I am aware, in the way you are aware of things at the edge of your vision, that my mother's face as Arthur escorted me in was something I had never seen there before. My brother sat very still. I crossed the stage when my name was called. The chancellor shook my hand. Someone in the upper gallery, I have no idea who, let out a whoop that made the whole hall laugh, and I laughed too. I held my degree and stood for the photograph and thought, I built this, I carried every piece of this alone, and here it is. The reception was in the atrium afterward. White tablecloths, sparkling water in glass pitchers, the dignified murmur of several hundred people who had all worked a very long time for something. I was standing with my supervisor and 2 of my doctoral cohort friends when my mother found me. She came alone. That told me something. That was lovely, she said, with the brightness people use when they are covering something. Thank you for coming, I said. She looked at Arthur, who was standing a few feet away talking to my supervisor's wife. She looked back at me. You could have told us you'd made other arrangements. It was a little embarrassing. I set down my glass of sparkling water. I had been waiting for this. Not with anger, I want to be clear about that. I had moved past anger somewhere around year 3 of quietly documenting what my brother had done in my name. What I felt in that moment was something more like resolution. I'd like to talk to you about something, I said. And I'd like Dad to be here for it. She started to say that now wasn't the time. It won't take long, I said. She got my father. He came over with the slightly wary expression of a man who has spent decades being a bystander to things he didn't fully understand but also didn't stop. There's a fraud investigation open with the RCMP, I said, keeping my voice level and quiet. It involves identity fraud. Mine. It's been ongoing since 2021, and they've been building the file for some time. I paused. They interviewed someone in our family this week. I want you to know that I cooperated fully with the investigators from the beginning, that I have documentation going back 8 years, and that I expect the process to move fairly quickly from here. My father went a particular shade of pale that I had not seen before. My mother said, "What are you talking about?" You know what I'm talking about, I said, and I could see from the way her face moved that I was right. I had one more thing to say. I had been precise about it in my own mind for a very long time. I spent 8 years in this program, I said. I did it while managing the damage from what was done to my credit. I did it while getting those accounts closed one by one and rebuilding my score from the ground up. I did it while watching you tell me to be smaller, be quieter, be less. I want you to understand that I am not angry. I forgave you individually, privately, a long time ago. But I also reported what happened to me because it was the right thing to do, and nothing about today changes that. There was a long silence. In the atrium around us, glasses clinked and people laughed, and someone was taking a photograph with a large bouquet of flowers. My mother opened her mouth. She closed it. Arthur appeared at my shoulder at that precise moment. I do not know if it was instinct or coincidence, but I suspect the former, and said in his easy, warm way, "There's someone from the dean's office who wants to get a photo with our new doctor." He looked at my parents briefly, politely. "Would you excuse us?" We walked away. My brother left the reception early. My parents stayed for another 20 minutes and then they left too. My supervisor told me later that my mother had sought her out before leaving and told her that I had always been very independent in a tone that was presumably meant to be critical. My supervisor had said, "Yes, that's exactly what made her a remarkable researcher." The weeks that followed were quiet in the way that the end of something long is always quiet. The investigators concluded their work in late April. My brother was charged under the Criminal Code of Canada with identity fraud and unauthorized use of credit data. The total amount across all 5 accounts was just under $42,000. His lawyer entered a guilty plea in May. My parents called me twice during that period. I answered the second call. My father did most of the talking, which was unusual. He said they were struggling. He said he didn't know what they were supposed to do now. I told him I understood and I meant it. I told him I would be in touch. I started my new position in Ottawa on a Tuesday in early June. I drove there with my cat and 2 carloads of boxes and a plant that had survived my entire doctoral program and to which I felt a perhaps unreasonable attachment. I found an apartment near the Rideau River with good light and a small balcony where I have started growing tomatoes. Arthur and his wife sent me a card with a photograph of the 4 of us. Him, his wife, my supervisor, and me, taken in the atrium right after the ceremony. I look in that photograph like someone who has just put something down that she has been carrying for a very long time. I keep it on my desk. There is a quote I came across in the second year of my doctoral work, in a paper about kinship structures in post-colonial family systems, and I have thought about it many times since. The idea that the obligations we feel most deeply are not always to the people who share our blood, but to the people who chose us when they didn't have to. Arthur chose to show up. My supervisor chose to believe in my work for 8 years. My 2 friends from the cohort, who sat in the front row and wept when my name was called, chose to stay. My brother made his choices too. So did my parents. I am not telling this story because I want people to feel sorry for me. I don't need that. I am 31 years old and I have a doctoral degree and a job I love, and tomatoes coming in on my balcony, and a whole enormous life opening out in front of me. I am telling it because there was a version of me, at 23, at 26, at 29, who believed that shrinking yourself was the cost of keeping the peace. who answered okay to things that were not okay because she didn't yet have the ground under her to say anything else. You build the ground, you document the thing, you keep going. And one day you walk into a room full of light with someone who chose you on your arm, and you cross the stage, and someone in the balcony whoops for you, and you laugh. That's enough. That's more than enough.